The searchlight beam stabbed through the darkness like a white-hot blade, transforming night into noon in less than a heartbeat. Kapitän-Leutnant Jürgen von Rosenstiel, commanding U-502, had exactly 19 seconds from the moment that 22 million candle-power beam locked onto his submarine until 4 depth charges bracketed his vessel at 0347 hours on July 5, 1942. The Bay of Biscay, which had been his sanctuary under cover of darkness just moments before, became his executioner. Von Rosenstiel never saw the Wellington bomber approaching. His lookouts, 4 men with collectively decades of Atlantic experience, never heard the engines. The submarine's Metox radar detector, which should have screamed warning of approaching aircraft, remained silent. One moment, U-502 cruised on the surface under what the crew called black security, the darkness that had protected German submarines since the war began. The next moment, von Rosenstiel stood illuminated in a circle of light so bright his shadow appeared on the conning tower deck like a photograph. The diving klaxon sounded, but the compressed timeline allowed no margin for error. As the conning tower hatch clanged shut and seawater began flooding the ballast tanks, Pilot Officer W. Howell of 502 Squadron released his weapons. The submarine was still on the surface when the depth charges detonated, their combined force of 2,600 pounds of Torpex explosive, creating a water hammer that crushed U-502's pressure hull like an eggshell. 6 days later, when the submarine was finally destroyed by combined air and surface attacks, recovered documents revealed the psychological trauma that single illuminated moment had inflicted on the crew. Von Rosenstiel's war diary contained a passage that would be studied at German submarine headquarters for months. The enemy possesses a weapon that eliminates our primary defense: darkness. We had no warning, no radar detection, no engine sound. Just sudden daylight where there should have been protective night. If they can see us when we cannot see them, how do we survive? This question would haunt every U-boat commander operating in the Atlantic and Bay of Biscay from mid-1942 onward. The introduction of the Leigh light, a deceptively simple innovation that married radar guidance to searchlight illumination, compressed the critical window between detection and death to mere seconds, and transformed submarine warfare forever. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The technological evolution that led to this moment began not with dramatic breakthroughs, but with a fundamental problem in anti-submarine warfare. Royal Air Force Coastal Command had been hunting U-boats since 1939, but night attacks remained frustratingly ineffective despite the introduction of ASV Mark II radar in early 1942. Squadron leader Humphrey de Vere de Leigh, an Australian officer serving with RAF Coastal Command, understood the paradox intimately. The 1.7-metre wavelength radar could detect a surfaced U-boat at 10 to 15 miles in any weather, day or night. Aircraft could track the submarine using radar returns, closing the distance while the target remained unaware. But at approximately 1 mile, the radar signal became confused by surface returns from the ocean itself. Contact was lost precisely when visual identification became necessary. In that final mile, submarines would hear aircraft engines, sound the diving alarm, and disappear beneath the surface. Darkness, which should have been an ally for hunting aircraft, became the submarine's protector. The bomber crew would arrive over empty water, unable to see their target, forced to drop weapons blindly with minimal chance of success. Leigh's solution possessed elegant simplicity. Mount a searchlight, powerful enough to illuminate a submarine at the exact moment radar contact failed. The light would only activate for the final 30 seconds of approach, too brief for the submarine to complete a crash dive, but sufficient for the bombardier to visually acquire the target and release weapons accurately. The concept required solving multiple technical challenges. The searchlight needed extraordinary power, 22 million candle power, generated by a retractable turret mounted in the aircraft's belly. The beam had to be precisely aligned with the aircraft's flight path and capable of adjustment for windage and altitude. The illumination system had to work flawlessly under combat conditions, triggered automatically as radar range decreased to 1 mile. Wing Commander Jefferson Greswell conducted the first operational Leigh light attack on June 4, 1942, flying Wellington DV 819 of 172 Squadron. His target was the Italian submarine Luigi Torelli, surfaced in the Bay of Biscay. The after-action report described the engagement with clinical precision. Radar contact established at 12 miles. Approach conducted at 120 knots at 800 feet altitude. At 1 mile range, Leigh light activated. Submarine fully illuminated. Crew visible on deck. 4 depth charges released from 300 feet. Target crash dived before weapon impact. Charges detonated close aboard, but assessment inconclusive due to submarine's rapid submergence. Though the attack failed to sink Luigi Torelli, due to depth charges that proved defective, the psychological impact was immediate and profound. The Italian submarine's commander reported being attacked without warning at night, an experience that contradicted everything submariners understood about their vulnerability. Darkness, which had meant safety for 3 years of warfare, no longer provided protection. The first successful Leigh light sinking came exactly 1 month later, when Howell's attack on U-502 demonstrated the weapon's lethality. German submarine headquarters received von Rosenstiel's report with the kind of dread reserved for technological game-changers. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of Germany's U-boat force, immediately recognized the strategic implications. His war diary entry for July 12, 1942 read, "Reports from U-502 indicate enemy has developed method of night attack without warning. If confirmed, our boats lose their primary defense mechanism during surface operations." The mathematics of submarine survival depended entirely on warning time. A Type 7 U-boat, the backbone of Germany's submarine fleet, could execute an emergency crash dive in 20 to 30 seconds under ideal conditions. The evolution required precise choreography. Bridge watch clearing the conning tower in 10 seconds, ballast tank vents opening immediately, negative tank flooding to force the bow down, diesel engines shutting off, electric motors engaging, bow planes set to maximum down angle. But these specifications meant nothing if the submarine received no warning that aircraft approached. The comfortable margins of safety that had existed throughout 1941 and early 1942 depended on detection systems providing adequate time to initiate the dive sequence. Lookouts could spot aircraft at 8 to 10 miles on clear days, providing 3 to 4 minutes of warning. Even at night, experienced watch officers could hear aircraft engines at sufficient distance to allow safe diving. The Metox radar detector, introduced in early 1942, gave U-boats even greater confidence. This French-designed receiver could detect ASV Mark II radar emissions from 6 miles away, providing ample warning even when visual or acoustic detection failed. Radio operators monitoring the Metox could determine not only that radar had detected the submarine, but when the aircraft had locked onto them, the pulses would change from sweeping to steady, indicating the patrol aircraft had acquired a target. This technological security blanket created operational confidence among U-boat commanders. Standard procedure called for maintaining 4 lookouts during surface operations, each scanning a specific sector. Combined with Metox coverage, submarines operated with comfortable safety margins. Even when surprised, 90% successfully crash-dived to safety before weapon release throughout the first half of 1942. The Leigh light shattered this security by compressing reaction time beyond the physical limits of crash dive procedures. The mathematics were brutal and inescapable. A Wellington bomber approached at 120 miles per hour, covering the final mile between radar failure and weapon release in exactly 30 seconds. Subtract 5 seconds for light activation and crew recognition of danger. Subtract another 5 seconds for the diving alarm to sound and the bridge watch to react. 20 seconds remained to execute a maneuver that required 25 to 30 seconds under ideal conditions. The submarine would be on the surface, fully exposed, when the depth charges arrived. The question wasn't whether the weapons would hit, but whether they would detonate close enough to rupture the pressure hull. For U-boat crews, who had trusted darkness as their shield, this compression of survival time represented a fundamental shift in the nature of submarine warfare. Kapitän Lieutenant Werner Hartenstein, commanding U-156, recorded the first detailed German analysis of Leigh light attacks in his war diary from August 1942. We have encountered a new weapon that eliminates our defensive advantages. The enemy detects us with radar we cannot hear, approaches to point-blank range, then illuminates us with searchlight of extraordinary power. From light activation to weapon release appears to be 20 to 25 seconds. This is insufficient time to crash dive to safe depth. Even if we submerge immediately, we remain vulnerable to accurately placed depth charges. Hartenstein's analysis proved prophetic. Throughout August and September 1942, Leigh light-equipped aircraft operating from bases in Cornwall and Northern Ireland conducted increasingly successful night patrols. The Bay of Biscay, which U-boats had to cross when transiting between French bases and Atlantic patrol areas, became particularly dangerous. The tactical situation created what German submariners called the midnight dilemma. Traditional doctrine held that submarines should surface at night to charge batteries, ventilate the boat, and make best speed to operational areas. Remaining submerged meant exhausting batteries and travelling at minimal speed, 3 to 4 knots compared to 17 knots on the surface. But surfacing at night now invited attack without warning from aircraft that could see in darkness. Oberleutnant Zur, C. Hans-Joachim Forster, serving as watch officer aboard U-333, kept a detailed personal diary that survived the war. His August 1942 entries captured the psychological transition from confidence to paranoia. August 2nd. Surfaced at 2,200 hours to charge batteries. Clear night. Good visibility. 4 lookouts posted. METOX operating normally. All precautions observed. August 9th. Another boat reported Leigh light attack. Crew nervous during surface operations. Lookouts jumping at every sound. August 16th. Commander has ordered random crash dive drills. We submerge without warning. Remain down 10 minutes. Resurface. The theory is this will save us if caught during the vulnerable moments of surfacing. The practice is exhausting and consumes battery power we cannot spare. August 23rd. We now remain submerged until full, dark, surface for minimum time necessary to charge batteries, crash, dive before dawn. Our patrol speed has dropped to average 6 knots. At this rate, reaching operational area will take twice as long as previous patrols. The introduction of Operation Derange in early 1943 escalated the Leigh light threat exponentially. RAF Coastal Command deployed 131 aircraft equipped with the illumination system in coordinated patrols across the Bay of Biscay and western approaches. These aircraft operated in overlapping patrol sectors, creating continuous coverage that meant U-boats faced potential attack at any moment during surface operations. The statistics from this period reveal the transformation of the Bay of Biscay from transit route to killing ground. In April and May 1943, 56 U-boats were lost in just 2 months. Many of these submarines were sunk within sight of their home ports, caught during the vulnerable moments immediately after departure or just before arrival, when crew vigilance was lowest. U-465, under Captain Lieutenant Heinz Wolf, departed La Pallice on May 2, 1943. The boat never reached open Atlantic waters. A Wellington of 172 Squadron, using Leigh light for target acquisition, attacked just 18 miles from the French coast. U-465's radio operator managed to transmit a brief contact report before the submarine sank. Attacked without warning, illuminated by searchlight, diving, breaking off. The transmission ended mid-sentence. There were no survivors. The psychological impact of Leigh light attacks extended beyond the immediate terror of sudden illumination. U-boat crews began experiencing what later generations would recognize as anticipatory anxiety and hypervigilance. Every surface operation became an exercise in barely controlled fear. Lookouts stared into darkness until their eyes ached, knowing that the first indication of danger might be blinding light and imminent death. Machinist Johann Müller, a diesel mechanic on U-758, kept an illegal diary throughout his service. His entries from May 1943 describe the mental toll. We surface at midnight. The lookouts climb to the bridge. Everyone is tense. We know aircraft with Leigh lights patrol these waters continuously. The commander has told us we have perhaps 20 seconds from illumination to weapon impact. 20 seconds to crash dive, a maneuver that requires 30 seconds. The mathematics of our situation are clear. We cannot escape if caught. We can only hope they don't find us. This is not tactical doctrine. This is prayer. The technical specifications of the Leigh light system reveal why it proved so devastating to submarine operations. The 22 million candle power searchlight, mounted in a retractable turret beneath the aircraft's fuselage, could illuminate an area 1 mile in diameter from an altitude of 1,000 feet. The light source was a carbon arc lamp, requiring its own generator and cooling system, adding nearly 400 pounds to the aircraft's weight. The system integrated directly with the ASV Mark II radar. As range decreased to 1 mile, an automatic switch prepared the light for activation. The bombardier, watching the radar scope, would trigger illumination at the precise moment radar contact became unreliable due to sea return clutter. The submarine would appear in the center of the light cone, giving the bombardier approximately 20 to 25 seconds to visually acquire the target, make final aiming corrections, and release depth charges. The depth charges themselves had evolved significantly since the war's beginning. The Mark VIII depth charge, standard by 1942, contained 290 pounds of mineral explosive, a mixture more powerful than TNT. Set to detonate at 50 feet depth, these weapons created a pressure wave capable of crushing a submarine's pressure hull at ranges exceeding 30 feet. A Wellington could carry 6 of these weapons, releasing them in a stick pattern designed to bracket the target even if the submarine had begun its crash dive. German attempts to counter the Leigh light threat produced a series of increasingly desperate measures. The simplest response was tactical: alter surface patterns to minimize vulnerability. Dönitz issued orders in September 1942, directing U-boats to surface during daylight hours when visual detection would provide some warning, then submerge at night when Leigh light aircraft were most active. This reversal of standard operating procedure created new problems. Daylight surface operations made submarines vulnerable to visual detection by aircraft without requiring radar at all. The U-boat, designed for concealment, became highly visible against the ocean's surface during clear weather. Multiple submarines were lost to aircraft that spotted them visually from 10 or 15 miles away, long before the submarine's lookouts could detect the approaching threat. Kapitänleutnant Peter Kramer, commanding U-133, attempted a different approach. His boat began conducting aggressive, anti-aircraft defense during surface operations, manning additional machine guns, and preparing to fight attacking aircraft rather than crash diving. The theory held that damaging or destroying the attacking aircraft would be more effective than attempting an escape that the compressed timeline made impossible. The July 12, 1943 attack on U-441 demonstrated the futility of this doctrine. The submarine had been specially converted to what was called a flak boat configuration, with enhanced anti-aircraft armament including multiple 20mm cannons. When 3 RAF Beaufighters attacked in coordinated strikes, the submarine's defensive fire proved insufficient against overwhelming force. 10 men died, 13 were wounded, and every officer, including the commander, was incapacitated. Marine Stabsarzt Dr. Paul Pfaffinger, the boat's physician with no combat command training, had to navigate the crippled submarine back to port. The incident demonstrated that surface combat between submarines and aircraft favored the aircraft overwhelmingly. The submarine presented a stable target, its weapons limited by the platform's lack of mobility. Aircraft could maneuver, attack from multiple angles, and concentrate fire on the vulnerable conning tower, where crew members operated anti-aircraft weapons with minimal protection. Technological countermeasures proved equally ineffective against Leigh light tactics. The introduction of the Naxos radar detector in September 1943 offered some improvement over the original METOX system. Naxos could detect centimetric radar emissions, providing warning against the newer ASV Mark III system that was completely undetectable by METOX. But even Naxos provided insufficient warning against Leigh light attacks because the illumination system itself generated no detectable emissions. The searchlight only activated in the final 30 seconds of approach, far too late for effective evasive action. Some U-boats experimented with searchlight detectors, optical sensors designed to detect the Leigh light's characteristic spectrum. These devices proved impractical in combat conditions. The illumination period was so brief that by the time the detector registered light and sounded an alarm, the submarine was already under attack. The system added weight and complexity without providing meaningful defensive advantage. The most effective German response to Leigh light threat came not from technology, but from operational changes. The Schnorkel, adapted from captured Dutch submarine designs and deployed operationally in early 1944, allowed submarines to run diesel engines while remaining at periscope depth. This eliminated the need for full-surface operations during battery charging, removing the vulnerability that Leigh light aircraft exploited. However, the Schnorkel introduced its own severe limitations. Maximum speed while snorkeling was 6 knots, compared to 17 knots on the surface. The diesel exhaust created a visible wake and vapor trail detectable from miles away. The device required precise depth control, too deep and the automatic valve closed, creating a vacuum that could rupture eardrums and collapse the boat's ventilation system. Too shallow, and the Schnorkel head broke surface, creating a wake easily spotted by patrol aircraft. Most significantly, the noise of diesel engines running in the confined Schnorkel tube made acoustic detection of approaching aircraft impossible. Submarines running on Schnorkel were actually more vulnerable to surprise attack than those fully surfaced with alert lookouts. The device provided an illusion of safety while creating new vulnerabilities that patrol aircraft quickly learned to exploit. The compression of reaction time created by Leigh light attacks had strategic implications far beyond individual submarine losses. The broader Battle of the Atlantic hinged on Germany's ability to sink merchant shipping faster than the Allies could build replacement tonnage. This required U-boats to reach operational areas quickly, locate convoys efficiently, and conduct coordinated attacks that overwhelmed escort defenses. Leigh light operations disrupted every aspect of this strategic calculation. Submarines forced to remain submerged for extended periods consumed battery power at unsustainable rates. A Type 7 U-boat could maintain 7.3 knots submerged for just 1 hour before exhausting batteries. Surface operations, necessary to recharge, now invited immediate attack with minimal warning time. The result was a dramatic decrease in operational efficiency. U-boats that previously transited the Bay of Biscay in 3 to 4 days at surface speed now required 8 to 10 days, remaining submerged during daylight and surfacing only briefly at night to charge batteries and ventilate. This extended transit time reduced time available for actual patrol operations and decreased the number of submarines simultaneously available in operational areas. Fregattenkapitän Günther Hessler, Dönitz's son-in-law and chief of operations at U-boat headquarters, compiled statistical analysis of the Leigh light's impact in September 1943. His report made grim reading. Average patrol duration has increased from 42 days to 58 days due to extended transit times. Number of submarines simultaneously operational in Atlantic patrol areas has decreased from 65 to 43, despite no reduction in available boats. Merchant tonnage sunk per submarine per patrol has dropped from 8,400 tons to 3,200 tons. The enemy's night illumination system has reduced our operational effectiveness by 62%, without accounting for direct combat losses. These statistics revealed that Leigh light attacks succeeded even when they failed to sink submarines. The mere threat of sudden illumination and attack without warning forced operational changes that degraded U-boat effectiveness more comprehensively than direct combat losses. A submarine that survived a Leigh light attack but had to abort its patrol to return for repairs represented a strategic victory for the aircraft, even without achieving a kill. The psychological warfare dimension of Leigh light operations proved particularly effective. The weapon didn't just threaten submarines physically, it attacked the mental state of crews already operating under enormous stress. Submariners had accepted certain risks as inherent to their service. Depth charge attacks, destroyer pursuit, aircraft bombs. These dangers could be anticipated, prepared for, and in many cases avoided through proper procedure and alertness. Leigh light attacks offered no such psychological framework. The illumination came without warning, transformed night to day instantaneously, and allowed no time for the careful procedures that submariners trusted to preserve their lives. The experience violated the fundamental bargain of submarine warfare, that vigilance and proper technique provided reasonable survival chances. Oberleutnant zur See Heinz Schaefer, who would later command U-977 on its famous surrender voyage to Argentina, described the psychological impact in his post-war memoir. "We had trained for combat. We understood that war meant danger, that some of us would die. But the Leigh light attacks were different. They were random, unavoidable, and so sudden that you had no time to be brave or cowardly, skillful or clumsy. One moment you were on watch, the next you were illuminated like an insect under a magnifying glass. In those seconds before the depth charges hit, you weren't a warrior, you were just prey." This psychological dimension had measurable effects on crew performance and morale. Medical officers at French submarine bases reported increasing rates of what would later be recognized as combat stress reaction: insomnia, hypervigilance, exaggerated startle response, and difficulty concentrating. Crew members became jumpy during routine operations, diving at false alarms, seeing aircraft that didn't exist. The most experienced commanders recognized that managing crew psychology became as important as tactical proficiency. Kapitän-Leutnant Wolfgang Luth, one of Germany's most successful U-boat aces with over 200,000 tons of shipping sunk, addressed the Leigh light threat in his final patrol report from November 1943. "The weapon itself is less dangerous than its psychological effect. We can survive the depth charges if we maintain discipline and execute proper procedures. But we cannot survive if crew members panic when illuminated. I have therefore instituted drilling that simulates sudden light exposure. We surface at night, then I have the conning tower suddenly illuminated by our deck lights while sounding the alarm. This acclimates the crew to the sensory shock of illumination and maintains their ability to function during those critical seconds." If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Luth's approach represented a sophisticated understanding of how technology had transformed submarine warfare. The Leigh light wasn't just a tactical weapon. It was a psychological instrument that exploited the human nervous system's response to sudden threats. Accommodation through repeated exposure was the only available countermeasure, and even this provided limited protection against the primal fear of sudden illumination, followed by explosive attack. The Allied understanding of Leigh light effectiveness came from multiple sources: operational analysis of attack success rates, intelligence derived from interrogating captured U-boat crews, and ultra-decrypts of German naval communications. These sources revealed that the weapon achieved strategic impact disproportionate to the number of submarines actually sunk. A detailed after-action analysis compiled by RAF Coastal Command in December 1943 examined 97 Leigh light attacks conducted between June and November. The findings illuminated the weapon's true effectiveness: direct sinking of submarine, 14 instances, 15% success rate; submarine damaged forcing abort of patrol, 23 instances, 24%; submarine forced to crash dive without damage, 41 instances, 42%; attack failed due to equipment malfunction or submarine escaping, 19 instances, 19%. The analysis noted that even unsuccessful attacks, where the submarine escaped undamaged, achieved strategic effect. The forced crash dive consumed battery power, required extended time submerged for safety, and delayed the submarine's progress toward operational areas. Multiple failed attacks during a single transit could force a submarine to abort its patrol entirely due to battery exhaustion or lack of time remaining for actual operations. More significantly, the analysis revealed that U-boat commanders increasingly avoided surface operations entirely, even when this meant aborting patrols due to low battery reserves or mechanical problems that could only be addressed on the surface. The mere presence of Leigh-equipped aircraft created an area denial effect that restricted German submarine operations more effectively than conventional anti-submarine measures. Lieutenant Commander Robert Hopgood, who helped establish American anti-submarine doctrine based on British Leigh operations, described the strategic concept. We learned that the primary goal wasn't necessarily sinking every submarine we detected. It was creating conditions where submarines could not operate effectively. Every forced crash dive, every aborted patrol, every commander who chose to remain submerged rather than risk surface. Operations contributed to Allied strategic objectives. The Leigh gave us the ability to control the surface of the Atlantic. Once we controlled the surface, submarines could only operate at reduced efficiency, and reduced efficiency meant reduced sinkings, which meant winning the Battle of the Atlantic. This understanding led to the integration of Leigh operations into broader anti-submarine warfare doctrine. Instead of isolated patrol aircraft hunting individual submarines, Leigh-equipped planes operated as part of coordinated systems, including surface escort groups, long-range patrol aircraft with extended radar coverage, and direction-finding stations that located submarines through their radio transmissions. The Battle of the Atlantic reached its crisis point in May 1943, a month German submariners would call Black May. The U-boat force lost 41 submarines while sinking only 34 merchant vessels, a catastrophic exchange rate that marked the turning point of the campaign. Leigh attacks accounted for 9 of these losses directly, with another 17 submarines damaged or forced to abort patrols after Illuminated attacks. The battle around convoy ONS-5 between May 4th and 6th demonstrated how Leigh operations integrated into comprehensive anti-submarine defense. 17 U-boats attacked the convoy in coordinated wolfpack tactics. Surface escorts, supported by Leigh-equipped aircraft from Iceland, created a defensive system that prevented effective submarine operations. 6 U-boats were sunk, 11 were damaged, and not a single merchant ship was lost. Average warning time before air attack for submarines in this battle, 8 seconds. Percentage of successful crash dives when attacked, 31%. U-boats able to execute successful torpedo attacks, 0. Admiral Donitz's war diary entry for May 24, 1943 conceded defeat. The enemy's new location devices and weapons have torn our sole offensive weapon from our hands. Aircraft can now hunt submarines at night with the same effectiveness as daylight operations. The submarine force can no longer operate in convoy areas. The Battle of the Atlantic is lost. We must withdraw boats from the North Atlantic until new weapons restore the balance. This withdrawal marked a strategic defeat from which German submarine operations never recovered. The Leigh, combined with improved radar, depth charges, and escort tactics, had compressed submarine survival time beyond sustainable limits. The comfortable margins that had allowed U-boats to dominate Atlantic commerce in 1941 and early 1942 had vanished. The human stories within this technological transformation reveal the personal cost of modern warfare. Dr. Paul Pfaffinger, the physician who saved U-441 after the July attack that killed or wounded every officer, spent 31 hours navigating the damaged submarine back to port while wounded crew members manned battle stations. In a 1976 interview, he reflected, "I saved more lives in those hours than in my entire medical career. We had perhaps 5 seconds warning when those Beaufighters attacked, 5 seconds between life and death. I was a doctor, not a commander, but in those seconds after the attack, medical training meant nothing. What mattered was keeping the boat afloat and getting wounded men home." Herbert Werner, who survived 5 different U-boat commissions and wrote the memoir Iron Coffins, described the evolution from confident hunter to hunted prey. "We measured our lives in seconds, the seconds between detection and death. Those seconds were everything. In 1941, we had minutes of warning, time to dive safely, time to evade. By 1943, we had seconds, barely enough time to sound the alarm. By 1944, we had nothing. The night that had protected us became irrelevant when they could create their own day with searchlights. The last operational Leigh light attack occurred on March 24, 1945, when a Liberator of 120 Squadron illuminated and sank U-965 west of Ireland. By this late stage of the war, German submarines rarely operated on the surface at all, spending up to 20 hours daily submerged and using schnorkels for the brief periods when diesel charging was absolutely necessary. The Leigh light had fulfilled its purpose so completely that its targets had essentially vanished from the surface. Post-war analysis by both German and Allied naval historians identified the Leigh light as one of the decisive technologies of the Battle of the Atlantic. Unlike dramatic weapons systems such as acoustic torpedoes or new submarines, the Leigh light achieved strategic impact through subtle compression of time. It didn't make submarines easier to find or destroy directly. It eliminated the buffer of safety time that allowed submarines to escape once detected. Fregattenkapitan Adalbert Schnee, one of Germany's most decorated U-boat commanders, stated at a veterans' reunion in 1975, "We were magnificent warriors defeated by a searchlight." That sounds absurd, but it's true. The Leigh light took away the seconds we needed to survive. 20 seconds might not sound significant, but in submarine warfare, those seconds meant everything. We could crash dive in 30 seconds, they could attack in 25. That 5-second gap killed thousands of submariners. We weren't defeated by superior courage or better seamanship. We were defeated by arithmetic, by the simple mathematics of time. The technical lessons from Leigh light operations influenced submarine design and doctrine for decades afterward. Modern submarines never surface except in friendly waters, making the crash dive obsolete as a defensive maneuver. Nuclear propulsion eliminated the need for surface charging operations, removing the vulnerability that Leigh light aircraft exploited. Contemporary submarines remain submerged for months at a time, only occasionally approaching periscope depth for communication or navigation purposes. Yet the fundamental vulnerability remains. Any military system dependent on narrow time margins for survival is inherently fragile. Today's stealth aircraft, cyber weapons, and missile defense systems face the same challenge that confronted U-boat commanders in 1943. Technological advantages that provide comfortable margins of safety can disappear overnight when adversaries develop effective countermeasures. The U-boat memorial at Labo Naval Memorial near Kiel preserves U-995, the last surviving Type 7 submarine, as a museum ship. Visitors can walk through the cramped compartments where crews once lived and worked. A plaque near the conning tower reads, "In memory of the 28,000 German submariners who perished at sea." Many of these men died in the seconds between Leigh light illumination and depth charge detonation, caught in the compression of time that turned experienced warriors into helpless targets. The story of U-boat captains facing Leigh light attacks represents more than tactical history. It illustrates how technological innovation transforms warfare by altering the fundamental parameters of combat. The U-boat entered the war with reliable defensive mechanisms, alert lookouts, radar detectors, and the ability to crash dive in 30 seconds. These defenses shaped German naval strategy and enabled wolfpack tactics that nearly strangled Allied supply lines. But the same scientific progress that gave submarines their underwater refuge took it away through innovations that compressed reaction time beyond human and mechanical limits. For the men who lived through this technological revolution, those disappearing seconds defined everything. They had trusted their lives to procedures proven effective through experience, only to watch those procedures become obsolete in months. Kapitänleutnant Peter Kremer, whose U-333 survived multiple Leigh light attacks, provided perhaps the most eloquent summary in his post-war memoir. "We went to war believing German engineering and training would prevail. We learned that in modern warfare, technological advantage is temporary. The night vision we relied on, the darkness that protected us, meant nothing when they could create daylight at will. We calculated that we needed 30 seconds to crash dive to safety. They calculated that they could attack in 25 seconds. The difference of 5 seconds determined the outcome of the Atlantic War. 5 seconds. That's how narrow the margin between victory and defeat, between survival and death, between strategic success and catastrophic failure. The mathematical brutality of this calculation haunted German submarine operations for the remainder of the war. Between 1942, when Leigh light attacks began, and 1945, German U-boats sank progressively fewer merchant ships while suffering exponentially higher losses. The statistics tell a story of technology eliminating tactical advantage. 1942, before widespread Leigh light deployment. U-boats sank 1,094 merchant ships, totaling 7.8 million tons, while losing 87 submarines, an exchange ratio of 12.6 ships per U-boat lost. Average warning time before night attack, 180 seconds. Successful crash dives, 89%. 1943, widespread Leigh light operations. U-boats sank 363 merchant ships, totaling 2.2 million tons while losing 258 submarines, an exchange ratio of 1.4 ships per U-boat lost. Average warning time before night attack, 15 seconds. Successful crash dives, 31%. 1944 to 1945, complete Allied dominance. U-boats sank 132 merchant ships while losing 344 submarines, an exchange ratio of 0.3 to 8 ships per U-boat lost. Average warning time before night attack, 5 seconds. Successful crash dives, 15%. Of the 40,000 men who served in German U-boats during the war, 28,000 died, a 70% casualty rate, the highest of any service in any nation during World War II. While Leigh light attacks accounted for a relatively small percentage of these deaths directly, the weapon's strategic impact extended far beyond vessels actually sunk. By compressing reaction time and eliminating the submarine's defensive advantage in darkness, the Leigh light forced operational changes that degraded effectiveness and increased vulnerability across the entire U-boat force. The ghosts of U-boat crews who died believing they had seconds to spare serve as warning to contemporary military planners. In warfare, as in life, nothing is permanent except change itself. Yesterday's decisive advantage becomes today's vulnerability. Systems that depend on narrow margins of safety, on seconds of warning time, on technological advantages over adversaries, exist in a state of fundamental fragility. The German submarine force learned this lesson through bitter experience. They entered the war with equipment, training, and doctrine that provided comfortable margins of safety. They ended the war with those margins compressed to nothing, watching from periscopes as the ocean's surface became a killing ground where darkness no longer meant security and seconds no longer meant survival. The final irony remains stark. The most successful submarine force in history was neutralized not by superior seamanship or courage, but by the elimination of less than 30 seconds of warning time. Those seconds, counted desperately by lookouts, measured precisely by engineers, lost irrevocably to innovation, determined the fate of nations and the lives of thousands of young men who never saw the light that killed them until it was too late. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.